So first off, what's changed? The rainfall forecasts have come down just a little bit for most of our area, but we do still have the risk of flash flooding. We have seen that moderate coastal flooding we were concerned about that's occurred overnight, and that's along the Gulf and the bays. The track is also slightly slower and farther east than it was yesterday afternoon. So here's a look at the track. We'll zoom in on this a little bit further on a later slide. The storm now has sustained winds of 50 miles per hour, so that's just a little bit lower as well than it had yesterday. Still tracking toward the west-northwest at 7 miles per hour. It's forecast to come in and make landfall around Matagorda Bay and then slow down as it does so, moving very slowly around the bay. We'll talk later how that's one area of concern for heavy rain, given the slow motion in that area. And then it's forecast to move either up the coast, maybe just offshore, or maybe just inland of the coast. Hard to say still the exact details, but it will be slow movement as it moves up the coast, weakening back to a depression as it gets to the Houston-Galveston area. Storm should finally push east of the area Wednesday afternoon or night, and we'll see improving conditions at that time. Here's kind of a closer look at the forecast as far as the timing of the winds and the intensity. You can see here the current position here, Monday around 10 a.m., 50 miles per hour, moving west-northwest at 7, as we talked about. Moving steadily toward the coast, very close to Matagorda by 7 p.m. this evening. And then you could see very little movement as it sits over Matagorda Bay between 7 p.m. this evening and 7 a.m. Tuesday. It may even stall for a time as it's making that turn. And then on Tuesday, it starts that northeast movement. In this case, the center line is just inland of the coast and then back offshore. But the cone here gives you an idea. There's still a range of possibilities as far as where it tracks. But this is the general idea. And then you see at 7 a.m. Wednesday, it's weakened to 35 miles per hour at that time as a depression. This is when it's making its closest approach to Galveston and Houston, would be during the day on Wednesday. Just a quick look at the satellite. You can see that swirl there as Beta is nearing the Texas coast. Very large wind pattern with Beta, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the thunderstorms right now, not a whole lot with that element of it near the center. This is a look at the latest wind gusts along the coast, and you can see gusts generally 30 to 40 miles per hour all up and down our coastline. Very large wind field, as we've been talking about on the north side of the center. And anytime you have a large wind field, that can push a lot of water onto land, and of course that's what we've seen with this storm. Even though the winds aren't especially strong, the size and persistence of that wind field are enough to cause this coastal flooding. So the numbers you see in red here are the wind gusts as of about half an hour ago. You can see some 40 mile per hour values near the mouth of the bay here, and then generally 30 to 40 along all up and down the coast. The center is sort of near this swirl down off Matagorda Bay. As that center comes in closer to land, we'll see these gusts increase down the coast in the Matagorda Bay area, perhaps up to that 50 mile per hour value. Here's a look at the radar, and you can kind of see even more when you put this into motion. You see that swirl getting ever closer to the Texas coast. It's not particularly well organized near the center of circulation, and that's an indication of how it's not especially strong. And you can see some of the banding on the north side. So our coastal areas are seeing some rain now from one of the spiral bands on the northern flank of Beta. And we expect to see more of those over the next 3 days, and those are going to produce our rainfall as we go today through Wednesday. Just focusing on now where those higher winds might be. As I said, we've got tropical storm force wind gusts already pretty much up and down the coast. If we do get the 58 mile per hour winds, more likely, as I've said, it's going to be down near Matagorda Bay, closer to where that center comes ashore. So for those folks in Brazoria, Matagorda, and Jackson County, look for those winds to pick up late this afternoon and evening as that center comes on land. Looking at tides, the tides we were concerned about, of course, have occurred overnight, and we still have some very high water out there. Looking at the tide models now, going forward, it is possible that the tide we had overnight and we're just coming out of now could be our highest high tide. So that's just a little bit of good news, but we expect more flooding with the next high tide. You can see for Galveston Bay entrance, that's up in that 4 to 5 foot above mean lower low water range and peaking right up about 3 feet above mean higher high water. So the next high tide possibly just a bit lower than the one we saw early this morning, but still enough to cause some minor to moderate coastal flooding. And then further decreases as we go ahead each day. But it's possible that we won't see the full decreases that are shown in the model. Sometimes it's a little bit slower process than the model is showing. But that does give you a sense that it's quite possible the worst of the high tides and coastal flooding we're just coming out of now. And you'll see a real similar picture for these other coastal locations. San Luis Pass, again, peaking up in that 5 to 6 foot range, probably closer to 5. And then as far as mean higher high water, just a bit over 4. Again, forecast to have a low tide that is not especially low, down near 4 feet. The next high tide tonight, probably not as high, so that's a bit of good news as we had last night. But still enough to cause some at least minor coastal flooding, and then improvement as we get into Wednesday. Freeport, you can see the curves, really much the same story as San Luis Pass. Moderate coastal flood levels currently, and gradually dropping from there. So likely some more flooding with the next high tide, and then you can see even as we get to Wednesday and Thursday, we're pushing up around 4 feet. And as you all know, we can get minor coastal flooding at the most vulnerable locations, even at those levels. So it's going to be a slow improvement. Sargent, same idea. Actually, water levels not quite as high there as we had further up the coast. But remember, as beta comes in closer to Matagorda Bay, I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bump in these levels that's not shown in these tide models. So keep that in mind. The levels seen here may be a little optimistic as we get to later this afternoon as far as a decrease there. In the bay, there's some interesting things to point out here. We're up around 5 feet as we thought. Right now, we're actually sort of not far out of high tide. And we have another significant high tide tonight between 4 and 5 feet. Mean lower low water near 4 feet today. Storm surge unit thinks could have even been up closer to 5 feet some spots, but at the locations here, we're seeing it up near 4 feet. And then Tuesday morning, your high tide again in the 4 to 5 foot range. And as far as mean higher high water that we're looking at above 3. So slow improvement. We often see water slow to drain out of the bays after these high water events. So again, I want to say that the values you see here and the decrease may be a little quick than we actually get. Then Pier 21, not too much different than Eagle Point. Near a high tide moderate flooding ongoing, and then just slow improvement going forward. Peak storm surge going forward. Now we had really 4 to 5 feet above mean high water for many of our areas overnight. Looking at the next high tide, probably more in that 2 to 4 foot range, and then decreasing from there. And storm surge warning still in effect. How about the rainfall? You'll notice this map looks a little different than we briefed yesterday. On this map, our higher rainfall amounts are focused more down toward Matagorda Bay and over coastal Louisiana. We do have a broad 4 to 6 inch range on average for the coastal counties, and then 2 to 4 a little bit farther inland. But I do want to emphasize, we still will likely get higher amounts than shown here when we get any persistent banding. Some of our model guidance this morning that we're looking at does show a concentration of higher values down near Matagorda Bay, and perhaps a band working in up the coast. So this still is probably the most uncertain part of the forecast, but you can see there has been a little bit of a decrease in the amounts shown here. Tornadoes, you can see there is a marginal risk of tornadoes today and Tuesday. Storm Prediction Center is thinking maybe isolated to few tornadoes. They're not seeing this as a big tornado event, but we do have that potential in those spiral bands as they work in. And I did leave out a slide that I'll go back to, but let's go ahead and hit the takeaways here. We do have moderate coastal flooding occurring. The morning high tide may be the peak, but only slow improvement tonight and Tuesday. So continued flood concerns, especially around times of high tide. Even the low tides are not going to be that low today. So we'll only have some relief from the flooding. Heavy rain and flash flooding still a concern. For the most part, we would expect 6 to 10 inches around Matagorda Bay, 4 to 6 inches for the coastal counties up the coast, but isolated totals up to 15 inches are still possible in any persistent banding. And that main concern would be down there near Matagorda Bay, but potentially even further up the coast. Gusty winds are occurring along the coast, tropical storm force winds pretty much everywhere, but we are looking at a period of higher winds near landfall down near Matagorda Bay later this afternoon and evening, perhaps up to 50 miles per hour or maybe even a tad higher. Concerning the rivers, and we do have Katie on to answer any river questions, but it looks like the areas should be able to handle up to about 4 inches. Anything over that will have to be monitored. She's focused mainly on Lavaca, Navidad, Tres Palacios, San Bernard, and of course all of our tidal tributaries are getting a combined impact from the surge and the rain. And so we are seeing some high water on the bayous and creeks already this morning, even before the rain came in. So it is kind of a combined rainfall surge issue for those tidal tributaries. And that is pretty much a summary. There was a slide I had left out inadvertently, and I will show that next.